In case you've never heard the term background artist, it's a credit that appears in almost every film. It sits near the bottom of the list, below the cast, below the supporting cast, and sometimes even below the catering. Background artists don't have lines. They don't have close-ups. They fill the empty spaces, and when the shot is done, they go home. Most of them are never named. Most of them are never known. And for the better part of a decade, Tony Jaa was something close to that. Not officially a background artist, he was a stuntman, a body double, a pair of hands and legs that made other people look capable. But he was uncredited in his Hollywood productions and uncredited in many of his Thai productions. Present in the movies, but invisible in the credits. Growing up, he had watched Bruce Lee and Jackie Chan and decided he wanted to create something beautiful. What he created instead was different from both of his inspirations. What all those years of invisibility built was something most would consider more in keeping with the beast than the beauty. This is 10-Point Fist, where we score the legends of action cinema, one fighter at a time. 6 categories, 10 points each, 60 total. The question is always the same. Who actually deserves to be here? Tachakorn was born in 1976 in the Surin province, in the rural northeast of Thailand. His family were elephant keepers, a hereditary role in the region, that is, people whose lives were shaped around animals that most of the world only encounters at a distance. Tony grew up watching kung fu movies on a small television. Bruce Lee and Jackie Chan were his heroes. He said on more than one occasion that watching them made him want to do something beautiful, something heroic. But if you've ever heard the phrase, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, it's something that really applies here. Because Bruce Lee's work is beautiful. The precision of it, the economy, the sense that every technique has been refined to its absolute essence and nothing remains that shouldn't be there. Jackie Chan's work is also beautiful, but in a different way. Comedic, generous, built around the idea that the fight is a kind of a dance. Drawn out, inventive, and full of personality. Both of them were making art. That was what a young Tony Jaa saw, and wanted to be. At 10 years old, he began training in Muay Thai, Thailand's national form of kickboxing. He also trained in Boran, an older form of the art that predates the ring and focuses on battlefield techniques. At 15, he came to the attention of Pana Ritikrai, a Thai stuntman, choreographer, and low-budget action filmmaker who truly had a talent for spotting raw physical ability and a willingness to spend years developing it. Ritikrai took him on, and the training that followed was thorough and unglamorous. From martial arts choreography, to wire work, to basic stunt falls. The work that came from this period was almost entirely invisible. In 1994, he appeared briefly in a low-budget Thai film called Spirited Killer. 9 minutes of screen time, no credit. He worked as a stunt double on Mortal Kombat Annihilation, a major Hollywood production doubling for the lead actor Robin Shou. He is listed in the film's records as the stunt double, however, he gets no credit in the film himself. Now that was a Hollywood production with a full studio infrastructure. In the Thai productions of the same period, the accounting of who did what was considerably less formal.
ขอบใจมากน้องบ่เป็นหยังครับไอ้ทำแล้วเรื่องไอ้เหี้ย
Adding to that, he was a dark-skinned actor in an industry that preferred pale complexions. He was from the provinces, and he was, in the most functional sense, a body, present to absorb the impact the camera needed to record, and then absent from everything that followed. And somewhere in that period, in the gap between what he had wanted to create and what the industry was allowing him to be, something in his approach began to change. He had started with beautiful as his goal. But beauty requires an audience. Beauty requires being seen. What happens to an artist who trains for years, but is relegated to the background while his body's work is seen as someone else's? Sometimes, I think, it creates something that is in one sense less beautiful and more hungry. It creates a form of skill raring to be unleashed. The film that would finally let him step into the frame was 2003's Ong-Bak. It took years of arguments with producers who didn't believe in it. The budget, when it finally came, was $1 million. And what it released onto the screen was not the beauty the child in Surin province had been reaching for. It was the beast that had grown as he waited for an opportunity to show it.
Fuck Muay Thai!
The response to Ong-Bak was immediate and nearly unanimous. Something had changed in the movies. The movie's plot is simple. A young man travels to Bangkok to recover a stolen Buddha head and finds himself fighting a crime syndicate. The plot is not the point. The point is what happens when Tony Jaa gets the frame, and why it looks unlike anything that came before it. Kung Fu cinema had its own grammar, a punch-and-pose rhythm inherited from Peking opera, where both fighters moved in a kind of choreographic conversation. That rhythm made long exchanges possible. Bruce Lee refined that grammar to its sharpest possible expression. Jackie Chan inverted it into comedy, but both were, in their different ways, working within it. Muay Boran, the martial art Jaa trained in, has no interest in engaging in a conversation. It was never designed for an audience. It was designed to end encounters using every part of the body. Fists, elbows, knees, and shins. When Jaa executes a technique in Ong-Bak, you are not watching a choreographic exchange. You are watching a man attempt to finish something. Every hit, every technique, feels like it's meant to kill his opponent. This was, if you understand where it came from, entirely logical. A man who had spent years perfecting a physical art form without ever being allowed to show it. Someone who had trained to create beauty and been handed anonymity instead would never have developed the cool precision of someone who knew they were being watched their entire career. He had developed something closer to hunger. What came out of him when the camera finally pointed his way was not a performance of violence. It was the unbridled rage of a frontman who had been trapped in the role of a background artist for over a decade. The influence on what followed was felt almost immediately. Indonesia made Merentau, which led directly to the raid. Vietnam made The Rebel. Even the John Wick series owns a visible debt to the principles Ong-Bak established, that the removal of the choreographic dressing and the replacement of fluidity with intent could make fight sequences feel genuinely dangerous. Hong Kong action changed after 2003 in ways that are traceable to what Jaa and Hrithik Rai introduced. The rhythm that had defined the form for decades became unstable. Yum Goong, released internationally as The Protector in 2005, reunited Jaa with director Prachya Pinkau and Pana Hrithik Rai. The film contains what remains one of the most technically demanding sequences in the history of action cinema. A 4-minute continuous single take of Jaa moving through a building floor by floor without cutting. The camera follows him. There is nowhere to hide a mistake. And it's in this vicious, unending sequence do you see Jaa's beastly hunger on display. The one-er nature of the scene lets us see Jaa getting tired as he progresses. But it also shows us his relentless progression despite that. It was a decision that would work or would flop. It works. Sadly, however, this next part of his career is where the problems begin. Jaa's first directorial efforts, Ong-Bak 2 and Ong-Bak 3, were overly ambitious historical epics that divided his audience and underperformed. The production of Ong-Bak 2 was troubled. At some point during it, Jaa left the set entirely, leaving Hrithik Rai to finish what remained. The film was split into 2 releases, and neither performed well. Part of the problem was what was happening outside of the film. His contract with Sahamongkol Film International, the studio behind Ong-Bak and Yum Goong, prevented him from working with foreign studios. The Hollywood offers that came after his international breakthrough, reportedly including Rush Hour 3 and Fast and Furious 4, couldn't be accepted. The window for a crossover that might have changed his career trajectory was open for a limited time, and he was legally unable to step through it. once again held back by the Thai movie infrastructures that had him working as an uncredited stuntman for so many years. He eventually stepped away from film entirely and entered a Buddhist monastery. Jaa became a monk in 2010. By the time of his return and the ending of the legal dispute in 2015, he was already 39 years old. He worked in Hollywood, in China, in franchise productions, movies like Furious 7, SPL 2, and Triple Threat that showcased his physicality without demanding much beyond it. They also exposed his limitations when it came to speaking English, and arguably more so when it came to acting. Pana Ritikrai, who had spent years training and championing Tony Jaa, passed away in 2014. He didn't live to see Furious 7. And by then, what Jaa had introduced had become the baseline. The hunger and killer instinct that had powered Ong-Bak had been absorbed and normalized by the film industry. The cinematic form had moved on, leaving the man who initially changed it in the position of demonstrating in later work what the world now had decided to take for granted. Let's start scoring. Fighting pedigree. Tony Jaa trained Muay Thai and Muay Boran from the age of 10. He's mentioned in his interviews that, like many Thai kids, he competed professionally in Muay Thai until he was discovered by Pana Ritikrai at the age of 15. The question this index always asks is whether the physical credentials are real or whether a performance of physicality has been mistaken for the thing itself. Watch the slow motion inserts in Ong-Bak. They're included specifically to show you what's happening at the point of impact. What you're seeing is a man who's trained for over a decade and a half before anyone even pointed a camera at him. The skill here is without question. I'm going with a 9 out of 10. There are no competition records or formal credentials, but he's been a lifelong practitioner of Muay Thai and Muay Boran, while also having spent time learning Taekwondo, Krabi Kerbong, and general stuntman skills. A 9 might even be harsh. When it comes to screen presence and choreography, we have to keep in mind that what Jaa does on screen is not simply look good. It's a revision of what martial arts choreography can look like. The removal of rhythm, the replacement of fluidity with killer intent, and the insistence that every technique carry the weight of something designed to conclude rather than extend the fight. The ceiling here is, though, very high. 9 out of 10. It reflects both his peak works as well as acknowledging that none of his post-2008 material even comes close to what he had done initially.
Tony Jaa physically has done things that nobody else is able to do.
When it comes to acting, Tony Jaa is not a trained actor, and his filmography hasn't required him to become one. In Ong-Bak and Yum Goong, his character exists primarily to move. And he moves with such authority that the absence of dramatic complexity doesn't really register as a deficit. SPL 2 gave him a little bit more, but it wasn't really enough to convince me of any sort of real acting range. 4.5.
Hello?
When it comes to his filmography, we've got to talk Ong-Bak. Ong-Bak is a canonical entry point, not just for Tony Jaa fans, but for a whole era of action cinema fans. Yum Goong isn't far behind. Those two films alone give him a solid foundation that most action stars will never achieve. Similar to when I was ranking Iko Uwais, the complication is everything afterwards fails to sustain that level. I'm gonna go with 7.5 out of 10. Because the peak of his filmography is real. It's just that it's followed by so much meh. Legacy and influence. You can draw a direct line from Ong-Bak to Merentau to The Raid, and from The Raid to the changes in European and American action filmmaking that followed. That's a pretty good legacy. It's also a hard first act to follow, because when the influence becomes the baseline, the originator can appear to be simply doing what everyone else does now. We have to remind ourselves that Tony Jaa didn't follow the trend. He's the reason the trend exists. 8.5 out of 10. Star power. There could have been a world where Tony Jaa became the global action superstar his talent suggested. Maybe a Thai equivalent of Jackie Chan. A face that sells tickets across every market. That was something that never materialized. The contract issues, the escape to a monastery, years and years of smaller work, all reasons that what could have been never was. What he has instead is the reference of action cinema enthusiasts worldwide, and a name that 2 decades later still carries genuine weight amongst fans who care the most about what he did. But also, a name that is remembered only by fans who care most about what he did. For star power, 7.5 out of 10. He certainly has an X factor, but it's one that's hardly been seen since the 2 highlights of his career. Let's see how he did. Fighting pedigree, 9. Screen presence, 9. Acting range, 4.5. Filmography, 7.5. Legacy, 8.5. Star power, 7.5. 46 out of 60. That's a final score of 76.7%. 76.7% is a commendable score. What Jaa contributed to action movies was genuinely transformative, and that kind of contribution earns its score regardless of what came after. The 2 categories that carry the score are the ones that are hardest to fake. A 9 in fighting pedigree means that the technique is real and impressive. A 9 in screen presence and choreography means that the technique translated to screen at the highest possible level. Everything else reflects his limitations. The weak acting range, a filmography that peaked early, and contract issues that held back his career. But the number that stays with me is not 76.7. It's the one that's harder to quantify. The years between 15 and 27, when Tony Jaa was a stuntman, present on set, but absent from the credits. Acting as someone else's body, or as just a piece of the background. This was a man who had started with beautiful as the goal. He'd seen Bruce Lee and Jackie Chan, and both were making beautiful art. And both were seen making it. That's what he wanted.
I start from the martial arts. I love martial art because I love movie. Because I saw the movie. I have the movie from the inspiration, Jackie Chan movie, Bruce Lee movie.
What the years of anonymity gave him instead was something that had no interest in traditional beauty. Muay Boran doesn't produce beautiful fighters in the same way cinematic kung fu does. It produces fighters with a terminal intent, and in a man who trained for years without an audience, someone who perfected a devastating physical art in the dark. That intent developed an edge that neither of his heroes ever had.
I've never felt power like it, to be honest, from any other martial arts actor.
Really?
The speed and the power that he has is honestly mind-blowing. You see it in the movie, obviously, but to see it in the flesh, in person, to feel it, I was covered in bruises.
Let's take a look at the leaderboard, shall we? 76.7% places Tony Jaa second on the 10-point fist index, just below Iko Uwais, but above Chuck Norris and Vidyut Jamwal. The leaderboard is starting to get a little bit more competitive. Let's see if our next ranking changes that. So, is 76.7 the right number? Is the acting range too low? Or is 4.5 already kind of generous? Does the filmography account fairly for what Ong-Bak actually meant? Let me know in the comments below. Like if you enjoyed this, subscribe if you want to be here for the rest of the list, and if you know someone who has never heard of Tony Jaa, send them this video. Then make them watch Ong-Bak, preferably in that order. Thanks for watching.